Welcome back to another YouTube exclusive. We had to hop on because there is breaking news. Let's just dig right into it. What happened in the NFL right now?
Dude, so we just did a whole session. We hopped off. I was eating sushi, and then this news breaks. The Chicago Bears have traded the number one pick in this year's NFL draft. Go ahead and hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe. Go ahead and hit that follow button. Go ahead and hit that notification bell. Really appreciate that.
Put
Let's
in
dig into all this
comment
shit.
who do you think the Panthers are going to get at number one? But we're going to get into that. Here's the trade details.
Go
Bears
ahead.
trade the number one pick. They receive from Carolina the number 9 pick, the number 61 pick, a first round pick next year, and a second round pick in 2 years, and DJ Moore, a number one receiver. Who won this trade? Right off the bat.
Right off the bat, you do want to say the Bears won this trade because there is not like a generational quarterback in this. There's no Trevor Lawrence. There's no Andrew Luck. There's not even a distinctive number one quarterback. If you really kind of want to get into like odds and ends of it, it would be Bryce Young in my eyes is the clear number one. But then you have the size issues. You have CJ Stroud there, but he's shown flashes. He hasn't really been super consistent. You have Will Levis, who is just all kind of tools. The same thing with Anthony Richardson, but just hopped up. So there's just so much. There's a lot of variables as far as who you would like at the GM spot to really take at number one. So I would go ahead and say the Bears won this trade. They got a pretty hefty load. They're going to build around Justin Fields. They still have a top pick. They have now a first and a second next year's draft, and they have a viable wide receiver. So that's pretty awesome haul.
Yeah, I think Bears hands down won this team. Everyone on Twitter is saying that they fleeced them. I don't know necessarily they won this by a long shot, but they definitely won this trade because they have a quarterback already. They desperately needed receivers. And so they get a proven, true number one receiver on their team. And they get a lot back. Like next year, that number one pick is going to be at least top 10, if not top 5. I don't like the trade from Carolina's perspective because you're not a quarterback away. Yes, you need a quarterback, but I think this is a draft where if I'm a GM, I'm kind of sitting back in that top 10 range and seeing what quarterback falls to me or which two quarterbacks fall to me. And I kind of would choose from them. And if I don't believe in them, then let me get someone else or trade back, and then we'll figure it out later in next year's draft. Because, I mean, why move up when the talent level, like, we don't know who is truly going to be the best quarterback in this draft.
There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of question marks in this quarterback draft. But,
And
I mean, you got to make it like when you're a middle of the pack, like Carolina team whose owner paid again cash, who wants to win now. They've already tried a couple of these, reclamation projects with Baker Mayfield, with Sam Darnold, just really hasn't worked. So, hey, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's get a young guy, someone that we can build upon, and let's go from there. So I kind of see where they're coming from. But I mean, there's also now talk from Joe Person from The Athletic, and he's saying that the Carolina Panthers actually feel like now they're in control of the draft and have been discussing actually trading back in this draft. So they're going to evaluate what quarterbacks are there. They're going to kind of take a look at the market because they did give up a lot for this number one pick. If they feel like they still have a shot at either the number one or the number two quarterback on their board, they will move down. It's a pretty risky move, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. 100%, you have to be a team that either loves Bryce Young or you have to trade with a team that loves Bryce Young, because that is the team. Like, the Houston Texans have been all over this guy. That's been ever since the season ended. That's been the pairing. Bryce Young, Houston Texans, Bryce Young, Houston Texans. So I think if you're the Carolina Panthers, you really have to kind of play into that And you have to like almost pit a team that loves Bryce Young against the Houston Texans, or fake out the Houston Texans and let them know, like, hey, someone's calling me about this pick. Do you want to trade one spot up and give me a first round pick next year, a second round pick next year? Like, let's do it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Panthers end up playing this out, because you can trade back and still get a viable first round quarterback in this draft.
Yeah, they do kind of control what happens now to an extent, but at the same time, they don't really control more than their pick. Like, yes, they can pick whoever they want at quarterback, but say they do trade with anyone else other than Houston, then they don't get one of the top two quarterbacks on their board, because whoever they trade with is getting a quarterback. Houston is getting a quarterback. So say you even go to number 3 on the draft, now you're getting the third quarterback. Is that really worth trading back to kind of recoup some picks to get the third quarterback on the board and limit your choices when you just gave up a haul to move up to number 1? So really, like, how much leverage do they truly have unless they're willing to step back and get a third quarterback or even a fourth quarterback off the board? Because if they don't go, if they don't get the number 2 or 3 pick, then there could be multiple quarterbacks going before that their turn.
But what if they're in
So,
love with like Will Levis? You know what I mean? Who arguably has fallen down to that number 4 quarterback spot. It's Bryce Young, then either your pick of either Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud. I have Anthony Richardson above CJ Stroud at this point, just because of all of his physical tools. And Will Levis has kind of fallen down the ladder a little bit. What if they love Will Levis? They evaluate all these quarterbacks and they're like, you know what? We can actually go ahead and trade down to, the number 5 spot where Seattle Seahawks are, and we want that pick. Like, we'll go ahead and wait and get Will Levis there. Or, hey, you know what? We're going to trade down to the number 6 spot with, the Detroit Lions, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So I think there's like you can maneuver down a little bit. Trade with the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons are there at 8. Will Levis might fall down to the 8 spot. Like, I think because there is. We'll see what happens with Jalen Carter, but Jalen Carter would have been the number 1 like defensive player off the board. But still, Will Anderson is there, and Will Anderson for the past 2 years has been one of the top defensive prospects to come out of this draft class. So there are still going to be, it's not going to be all QBs taken off the board. If you're Carolina, I feel like you kind of do dictate a little bit, because Cardinals aren't going to take a quarterback. They have Kyler. You feel like the Seahawks aren't going to make this their stand and take a quarterback, but maybe they will, even though they pay Geno. So you just kind of roll the dice a little bit and you start to weed it out. And you're like, okay, I can drop. The lower you go, you're like, I can maybe get a sweeter deal for this. Like, so.
but then it's kind of like, couldn't you just trade it up to the 5th spot instead of giving up all this for the number 1 pick? Like, really, how much are you going to even out by trading down that little bit? And it's like, you're trading, you could have just made that move instead of going through all this and then still getting that third or fourth quarterback off the board. Like, they had to have loved someone to go up to number 1 in order to get the number 1 or number 2 spot, because I think they don't want to go further than 2.
I think it's got to be Bryce Young then. If you loved someone and you know that you need to get the number 1 because the Houston Texans, again, loved Bryce Young, I think you had to leapfrog them then. So I think right now their thinking is, we love Bryce Young, but if there is even a comparable like number 2 in our eyes, we would trade with the Houston Texans.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be definitely an interesting draft. I have no idea who's going to go where. I think it's wide open right now.
Yeah, and I think Chicago Bears made out like bandits on this. Like, it's a really good spot. I think at this point now you're like, okay, now we hit free agency like, a bat out of hell. We have the most cap space of any team. Let's go out there and let's pick up a bunch of veterans that like can really make a difference and start to build a culture. Let's start to build out like this a winning football team around Justin Fields. Um, and you still have, pretty comparable picks at the number 5 spot or number 9 spot. So
Yeah,
it's a
and
win-win.
it's just kind of like the Bears did really fully control the draft because they had a quarterback. There's multiple teams that want to move up. Now, once they flip that to they take out one of the teams that needed a quarterback, how much control do they really have? What can they kind of get back? And if you're saying, well, we're going to give up all these draft picks and our best receiver so that we can flip this again and get stuff back, it's like, aren't you kind of borrowing money from someone to pay someone else back kind of situation, kind of
What
going
is
in a
it like
circle there?
borrowing Tom to pay Steve or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. I couldn't think of the names, but yeah, isn't that kind of situation where you're like, well, we're giving up picks here, but it's the number one pick. Someone's gonna want to trade up and give us another first and second. It's like, well, if these teams weren't willing to make that deal with Chicago, maybe they're all the rest of the teams are content with sitting back and taking a Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, like in the fourth or fifth, sixth spot, and then they have to take someone at number one now.
But I mean, if you think about it this way, if they would have traded for the number 3 spot with the Arizona Cardinals, you kind of do what 49ers did. And you don't think the 49ers would have just rather have given up a little bit more and moved up to the number 1 spot and gotten Trevor Lawrence? You know what I mean?
But the difference is Trevor Lawrence was the number one pick. Like everyone knew he was the guy.
Yeah, but still and the same thing can be said about Bryce Young. I know there is a question mark on his size and how he can hold up. And we've seen players like Kyler and Baker Mayfield who have been a little bit slighter, who really just can't hold up and withstand the whole entire NFL season. But Bryce Young is the number 1 quarterback if you kind of, look at his play on the field and what he can do and all his tools. So if you kind of look at it in that way, like you just there's something for not discounting being able to actually evaluate every single quarterback and make your decision based off of that. Because if you were to go to the number 3 spot, you're automatically taking Bryce Young off your board. Don't even think about it. But you make the jump, you give up a little bit more, and then you have all the options on the table. I'm just saying, like, if from a 49ers perspective, they would have loved to have given up more and just gotten Trevor Lawrence. You know what I mean? Rather than give up the first round picks that they did and just have it really basically down to it was Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, or Trey Lance,
Yeah.
Mac Jones, Justin Fields.
The thing that I see what you're saying, but the difference is like the skill level. Like Trevor Lawrence was a cut above everyone else. Like clearly, from a talent standpoint, he was going to be way better than everyone else. And in this draft, like I don't see it the way you see it, where you're like Bryce Young is number one. Like I don't see that. Like yeah, he played great, but he is really small, and I think C.J. Stroud pretty good. I think he's really good, and I think the NFL views Will Levis as someone who could be really good, even though I don't see it. Like he wasn't good in college, but I mean, we've seen time and time again they do not care about college wins or stats. They want to look at the tools. And so teams were viewing him before the combine and Anthony Richardson went off as someone who could be that top pick. And then you have Anthony Richardson who's going crazy. He went bonkers at the combine. And so he had those shot up boards. So I just don't think that there is a clear cutaway number one guy. And in a draft like this, like, do you want to give up a lot of stuff to move up to that number one spot? I think this was a draft where I would not have wanted to move up like that. But if I loved someone and I was like, that guy's a franchise guy, I want him, then yeah, I'm making the move. But it doesn't sound like they have that. I think they're kind of like hoping someone else has that feeling and trade for the number one pick.
Yeah, I just think that
That's a huge gamble.
you just do your due diligence and you want that shot to be able to evaluate all these guys and maybe you fall in love. Like, you know what I mean? You know, like that, what the fuck is that show on Netflix? Love is Blind. Well, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm just going to evaluate all this talent and eventually I'm going to fall in love with somebody.
Hey, Bryce,
That's what
you're my number one right now, Bryce.
that's what they're doing. They're taking the love is blind approach and they're just fucking speed dating through all these quarterbacks through the rest of this draft process. And eventually they're going to fall in love with somebody or they're going to say no at the altar and they're going to trade this number one pick, baby.
Yeah, we'll see. You guys, let us know in the comments who won the trade and what is Carolina going to do with this number one pick. Are they going to draft Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Levis? What are they going to do? Let us know. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Later.